Hi Eagles, it's Mrs. Barber. Welcome to our YouTube channel. I'm excited to record our first video for this channel, and hopefully this is a place that you will visit, especially when we start to post information about new teachers and your new classroom for the coming school year. So welcome and thanks for listening to this great story. So I have a book problem. I'll show you part of my problem. It's right here. Okay, this is just a few of the books that arrived over the last few days, which is really exciting because I love sharing books with teachers and students and the community. So tonight's book is called Equality's Call. It's the story of voters' rights in America. And I picked this book for a couple of reasons. The first one is today, this year is actually the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote. But also we do have elections coming up that are important for the future of our country. And so voting and voters' rights are not as simple as maybe we once thought. And there has been a lot of changes in our nation over the last 100 years when it comes to voters' rights. And so I want to share this story with you. I hope you enjoy it. Equality's Call. Our founders declared when our country began that consent of the governed was part of the plan. Through voting, elections, and representation, the voice of the people would strengthen our nation. In fact, though, for years, this great founding ideal was extended to some, and for others, not real. But we heard in the distance, equality's call. A right isn't right till it's granted for all. The state set rules about who got to vote, and your gender, your race, and your wealth were the note. White men with property went to the polls, but the rest of the people were left off the rolls. The dream of democracy wasn't yet true. There were changes to make. There was work still to do. But we heard growing clearer equality's call. A right isn't right till it's granted for all. The rules about wealth were the first thing to go. As more were enfranchised, their voices would grow. A small group of voices was raising the fact that enslavement was wrong and unspeakable act. Good people stood up for the truth that they knew. Abolition and suffrage were long overdue. We heard even louder equality's call. A right isn't right till it's granted for all. There was war in our nation and slavery ended. Amendments were added, the franchise extended. Now more men could vote, at least so said the law. Yet denial through taxes and tests was widespread. And the voices of women were mostly omitted. In only some states was their voting permitted. Nothing could muffle equality's call. A right isn't right till it's granted for all. Suffragists didn't give up on the fight, and the 19th Amendment gave women the right. But voters of color still met with oppression. Their voting was hindered by brutal suppression. So we passed legislation 1924, the Indian Citizenship Act is passed. 1964, the Civil Rights Act passed. 1965, Selma to Montgomery March, Voters' Rights Act is passed. 1970, the first extension of the Voters' Rights Act passed. So we passed legislation to make voting fair, to extend and protect voters' rights everywhere. We heard it, we felt it, equality's call. A right isn't right till it's granted for all. The journey's not over, the work hasn't ended. Democracy's dream must be constantly tended. But where we are now is in a debt that we owe to the work of more people than we'll ever know. And each time we vote, we acknowledge the past to honor our rights, to ensure they will last. For to vote is to answer equality's call. And each time we vote, we vote with them all. All right, so a beautiful story, and there's just a couple of things that I wanted to share with you from the back of the book. So this is a beautiful book because not only does it tell a story, but it's a historical story. And there's important information that I just want to share so that we understand that when the right to vote was given, it wasn't always with equality, and there were many strings attached. So in 1870, the 15th Amendment was ratified, and that granted African American men the right to vote. 1920, 100 years ago, the 19th Amendment was ratified, and that granted women the right to vote. In 1924, the Indian Citizenship Act granted citizenship to Native Americans. In 1943, the Chinese Exclusion Repeal Act granted citizenship to some Chinese immigrants. And the Immigration and Nationalities Act of 1952 ended Asian American citizenship restrictions. The 23rd Amendment was ratified in 1961, which gave residents of Washington, D.C. the right to vote for president and vice president. The 24th Amendment, ratified in 1964, outlawed the poll tax in federal elections. I think it's important to know what a poll tax is. Poll taxes were fees that had to be paid prior to voting, and they restricted the right to vote for people who were poor. Poll taxes were levied in some states, but they from 1890 to the 1960s. But the primary intent of poll taxes were to disenfranchise Black voters. So this was a real, even though Black men were given the right to vote in 1870, there were issues even until the 1960s with poll taxes that restricted Black American men's right to vote. And so this 24th Amendment abolished that poll tax. Voting rights in 1965 outlawed discriminatory voting rules, such as literacy tests. So this was another practice that was added to restrict people's ability to vote. Since then, many states have enacted new barriers to voting, such as ID requirements, and these restrictions affect voters' rights. The 26th Amendment was ratified in 1971, which lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. In 1984, the Voting Accessibility for the Elderly and Handicapped Act was passed, and that improved access to people to voting places. And then in 1993, the National Voter Registration Act required states to expand voter registration opportunities. So in 1993, we were still having issues, not very long ago, issues relating to voters' rights. And the Motor Voter Act, it was called, made it easier for Americans to register to vote because you could register to vote when you got your driver's license. So they tried to find a way to increase that access to voting opportunities. And then in 2002, the Help America Vote Act made reforms to the election system and also gave funding to states to improve voting equipment and things of that nature. Now, this list is not exhaustive like the book says. Voters' rights have been impacted by federal laws, by the Supreme Court's decisions, and even by state laws. The effort to protect voting rights is ongoing. So it's an issue that is still important today in 2020. And the last pages of this book talk about activists that have been in support of voters' rights for over 100 years. And it talks about each one of these individuals and how they supported voters' rights. And one of them, you know, is a gentleman that we just lost recently, Representative John Lewis, and his name is here as a civil rights activist who was born in 1940 and a politician who just passed away recently. The end of this book says, how will you answer equality's call? So I hope you enjoyed this book. When I recorded it on Facebook Live, Miss Mendez, one of our 5th grade teachers, says, what a history lesson. And I think that that's really important, that books can open our eyes to so many things. And that's why I'll be committed to continuing to share them with you on Facebook Live and through this YouTube channel. So school might be closed in September, but we're going to be opening up learning in lots of different ways. You can learn anywhere, at any time. So thank you so much. Hope to see some of your faces soon as we come to school to pick up Chromebooks and school supplies. Can't wait to meet you and see you face to face. Have a great night.